Good afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you are about to start watching this 30-hour beginning of peer support training to help you all join the cadre of people that is here to help offer a continuation and an extension hand to those who are in need, who serve. You'll see behind me my flag in my office that represents all of the first responders that we will be serving. And I am beyond humbled to be able to be part of this training and to guide you through what is considered best practices for how to be an effective peer support member or counselor. This training is going to be broken up into, the first part is a 6-hour portion of the 30-hour class. And of that 6 hours, we'll be breaking up the sections into 4 particular sections. The first one will be an introduction into peer support, as well as what is the why. Why is peer support so effective and so needed in our areas of expertise? The second portion will be on cultural differences and similarities between each of those types of first responders. And I will go into each color on the flag as we go into what each color represents if you're not familiar. I want to represent all first responders, every single one. One is not more important than the other, and that will be stressed throughout this presentation. And depending on which organization you are from or what your area first responder is, we will be focusing on whatever group needs more area of focus in their particular specialty so that we are meeting the needs of each peer support team who's in training. So we will be followed by the third portion, which is going to be on 8 dimensions of wellness, which is very key. And peer support is very much a portion of these 8 dimensions of wellness that we will need to be engaging in both ourselves, but also encouraging others. And then we'll be followed up by an introduction into just some basic emergency psychological first aid of just kind of setting the stage for the remaining of this course when we are able to meet in person for our next 3 days together. I look forward to that, as I would much rather not be a talking head at a computer. Full disclosure, this is not my forte. I would much rather be sitting in front of you, and I cannot wait until we are doing that together. We're going to be sharing a lot of stories. We're going to hopefully share and divide some pain. And I cannot wait to get to know each and every one of you throughout this training, which will be a long training together. And I just want to honor the fact that I know it's a sacrifice, most likely to get time off to be able to participate in this training. And I just want to give my utmost praise and props to all of you for taking the time to listen to this video. I don't want to be a talking head, but like I said, I believe that you were all chosen and honored to get this position to become a peer support counselor. And I know that you're going to want to hopefully pay attention and get something out of this. There will be a quiz at the end of the 6-hour video that you'll have to get the answers to on our first day. And so I just want to get the ball rolling and get going with our first portion and introduction. So here we go. So again, this is the 6-hour portion of the class. And like I said, it is just an absolute honor for me to be able to be part of this experience with all of you. I've been doing peer support training for over 2 decades in one form or fashion, both as a police officer and now as a clinician and consultant. And it's just something I'm extremely passionate about. And peer support is very much part of my own story, which brought me to this work in the first place. At the end of this class, you will have specialized training to be able to identify certain and common mental health systems that are unique to first responders. My hope is you will have finite listening skills and de-escalation skills if that were to present itself as a situation that you may be presented with. And then you're also going to have knowledge of how and when you should connect a peer in trouble to a mental health professional. Often when we are diehard caretaking people, we often fall into the trap of wanting to do more and more and more. And that's just who we are. That's what drew us to probably the field that we are in. And sometimes we have to acknowledge our own limitations in those moments and have that courage to reach out to somebody such as a mental health provider, myself, or someone that may be in charge of your team who has a mental health license, so that they can carry some of the burden of whatever is being presented that's way outside of your scope of just being a volunteer peer support person. And so I'm just absolutely excited to be here. I can't stress that enough. I can't thank you enough. I would imagine due to the level of insanity of staffing crisis and shortages and overtime that it probably took a lot for you to be able to even come to this class at the end of the summer. And so again, thank you for your sacrifice. If you worked nights, and I'll see you in the morning. I feel, I'm just glad that you're all here. For those of you, just kind of go over the this is part of my logo, but just who I represent, what the colors represent, and all of first responder land. Just to go up from the top to the bottom, the yellow stands for dispatch, and a lot of people don't know that. So I just want to educate that we are all under this umbrella of protecting others. The thin blue line is obviously for police. That thin gray line is for corrections officers. The beautiful red is for firefighters. White is for EMS. So medical professionals, paramedics, nurses, doctors, all who are on the front lines for those emergency types of medical situations. And then obviously green is for the military. So we all fall under this umbrella of helping these type of folks who are under this umbrella of being a first responder for their communities. And so I just like to kind of familiarize yourself, and we're going to be going into kind of all of the different subcultures of those subgroups, because you may be in one of those and came to this course and may or may not want to learn about dispatch and firefighting, but I can promise you in this work, we will all collide in our lines in one way or another in terms of working together and sharing and dividing pain and sharing and multiplying, hopefully, joy at some point in a time that is very, very difficult for our first responders today. And why I'm as passionate as I am to be part of this solution and to add to the cadre of people who are out there to help do extra work, to be of service to your peers, and have a better understanding and expertise of how to do that. Just kind of some housekeeping things. Don't want to bore you with this. This course number is 10680-00001 for the 30-hour course. It's 30 CEUs. And of the mandated coursework, depending on what your licensure is, 20 hours of crisis intervention that's mandated will be covered in this class, as well as 10 hours for officer wellness. So I just want you to make sure you keep track of all of your CEUs and your hours for this class. I will ask when we are in person that you just simply sign up each day. We'll have to record attendance like we're back in junior high, but we all know how that goes. There will be a quiz at the end of this 6-hour class, so I'll just throw that out there. And you'll get to bring your answers with on day 2 of our class as we start in person. And then simply just providing your name, post number if one applies, your email, your agency, and your position. As part of registration, just making sure you covered that and making sure that you complete the evaluation at the end of the course. As any other post-board required class, we ask that you complete a evaluation before you leave the class. That's how we get better and do better, and obviously validate the fact that you took a class and completed it. And then obviously every day we'll have a lunch, depending on what class this is going to be going into for the 3 days. People might want to fight for a half an hour lunch to get out early. We'll figure that out when we're in person. So that's just a little bit of that. I have to read this as part of a post-mandated training. I'm required to read this in its entirety at the commencement of the course. The name, Peterson Counseling and Consulting, is a continuing education sponsor as approved by the Minnesota Board of Police Officer Standards and Training. This course, Peer Support Counseling, course number 10670-00001, will be receiving 30 hours of continuing education. Sponsor of the course has written policy for the investigation and resolution of allegations of classroom discrimination. This policy applies to all faculty, instructors, administrative staff, and students. Copy of this policy may be obtained from the sponsor by contacting the appropriate name and contact information. Reporting. You're required to submit an affidavit of attendance to the post-board continuing education roster in order to attending and licensed officers to receive credit.
This affidavit of attendance form can be found in the form section of the post board website. And last, record keeping. Obviously, you're responsible for ensuring that you keep track of all of your course and approved credits and have proof of documentation that you completed it. Sorry to bore you with all of these things. Again, in terms of mandated coursework for post, those are the specific areas within the learning objectives that we will be covering. That's part of the mandated portion is the crisis intervention and mental illness crisis, and then officer / first responder wellness portion of that. This is a copyrighted video as part of this 30-hour training, and I ask that it's not distributed anyway after this class. So let's get back to what brought me here. Why am I here? I have been in law enforcement over 28 years, whether I was in a uniform or out of a uniform. And I have had my ability to do crisis work through wearing the badge, behind the badge, and then now as a clinical therapist and trainer. I was able to have a lot of different experiences as a police officer. I was a sergeant for several years. I was a negotiator in our SWAT team. I eventually was able to be team lead in our crisis negotiator team for SWAT for several years. I helped create and create curriculum on peer support training back in the 90s and have kind of been very passionate about this ever since. It's just kind of a natural thing. I've been drawn to psychology as long as I can remember. And it was just kind of a natural progression to go into law enforcement. I actually started my profession. I worked in corrections, actually in Red Wing at the Minnesota Correctional Facility there for juveniles. And I probably learned more there as a corrections counselor, which is what we called ourselves back in the 90s for juveniles, is I learned more about gangs and family systems that were just disruptive and dysfunctional of my year there than I ever did on the street as a police officer. And so every single experience I've had among all the different lines within the first responder system and flag has put me in a place that I've been able to move through the ranks. And hopefully my goal was to have an influence and to help make other officers have better, happier, healthier points of view. I've kind of used my position both in law enforcement and also in crisis work to transition into working only specifically with first responders. I've worked in a variety of settings when I switched careers back in 2012. And after 16 years in law enforcement, I went back to grad school and became a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, as well as a mental health provider with an expertise in trauma and addiction. I've been able to use this type of training in a variety of settings, both in chemical dependency treatment centers as well as crisis centers. I was a clinical director out in a women's chemical dependency treatment center out in the west side of Minnesota, excuse me. And I've also had lots of supervising experiences. And then I was able to kind of have a bigger, broader role, being hired to be the first full-time therapist of the largest agency in the state of Minnesota at the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office as their first full-time therapist. And so I've learned a lot from my positions and roles and where I've been and where I've gone. I've served with veterans for a variety of years, working as the mental health director for the Magnus Veterans Foundation. And my heart is just always with my first responders in terms of how we can best serve them. And so I kind of like to refer to myself as Rachel 2.0. First one was Rachel 1.0 with being a police officer. And now we've changed gears, taken away the duty belt, and we're able to serve in a much different way. My message is generally clear wherever I go, is I don't want anyone to ever feel that they're alone. I always want to be a safe place, a safe person to share one's pain and hopefully divide it with them. I want folks to leave feeling successful, feeling lighter, having more courage and faith in their own abilities. And my hope is that when someone leaves my office, they leave with some more hope than they did coming into it. as I've had these different variety of roles in leadership and a variety of settings working with first responders, I've also had my own private practice and consulting firm since 2015. And with that, I have served as a provider for over 25 to 30 police and fire agencies, serving as a mental health provider and crisis responder, in addition to a SWAT consultant and peer support consultation. I've had the ability of coaching other departments on how to create and build wellness programs that include peer support. And it is my privilege and honor to be able to join those in the highest level of standard that Minnesota has given, which is to create a very vigorous curriculum to follow, which is 30 hours, which is significant. And it's a lot of time. And I thank you all for being here and for sharing this with me. And I'm just really excited to be able to share more of my story when we're in person. There's obviously other reasons I'm not a police officer anymore, but I couldn't be happier doing what I'm doing today. And I can't wait to meet all of you in a few hours or days. So just kind of further background a little bit on me is, again, I started peer support since 1997. It's going to really date some people that maybe are not even that old yet in the class. So I'll just let you guys have the laugh after me. But again, assisted in getting a peer support training back in Madison, Wisconsin. My passion's always been in helping others. I often describe law enforcement as just being a social worker with a weapon. The way I was taught is we can talk our way out of anything, and that tended to work. Not all the time, but definitely assisted in my profession as a cop and in SWAT, and definitely in negotiation. We have to be able to BS with anyone. I was a sergeant for 16 years. And like I said, I was a field training sergeant. But one of my most, I guess, fulfilling roles is when I was promoted to sergeant, is I was placed in the role of critical incident facilitator, which meant in a department of over 400 cops, if there was a critical incident in the city, then it was my responsibility to put those resources together. And I was able to go train in critical incident stress management in New York with some of the best after 9/11. And that was an absolute powerful experience to get trained in CISM, or critical incident stress management, with folks from 9/11. And so I'm extremely passionate about doing debriefs and being able to be in the forefront of getting others through traumatic events as fast as we can, so that we don't allow this rapid deployment of trauma after trauma after trauma. And then we get to a therapist 2, 3, 4 years too late. And then it makes all that work so much more challenging, because the person didn't want to face it. They didn't want to address it. They wanted to ignore it. We want to push those things down. And unfortunately, I can relate to many of those things, because I have done that along my journey as well. As a woman in law enforcement, we didn't like to present weakness. And today, as a therapist, I have a very different version of what I consider weakness and strength. Today, a tear is a sign of strength for me, because it takes so much for me now to let that happen. And we are all just a work in progress. Like I said before, I own my own practice. I work for a variety of settings, and another partnership that I serve is with Health Quotient, which is powered by Twin Cities Orthopedic. And they have been diving in some of these state-of-the-art technologies in terms of providing all the 8 dimensions of wellness to what they call the tactical athlete, which is any first responder under that flag of colors that we talked about. And so they engage with other agencies in all of 8 dimensions. So not just mental health, but also physical, cardio, social, spiritual, and so on. And we'll get into those 8 dimensions of wellness much further into this training today. And the power of the peer is where I have been able to get to where I have been today. Part of my story is about recovery from a substance. And like I said, throughout the training, it's not a secret that I've been sober. It'll be 13 years, 9/26 of this year. And my definition of success is much different than it was 13 years ago. And peer support not only helped me as a police officer, but it also helped me get sober and divide and share the pain of what led me to drinking in the first place, which unfortunately was the loss of my brother which on the date of this taping today, today is his 18th anniversary of his death. And so again, with heavy heart, but open heart in terms of we all have been through things. We have all been through difficult things in our lives that have led us to want to help and be a peer in a much different fashion, more effectively, more helpful, more in tuned to someone that we care about. So enough about who I am. You'll be learning much about me in the next 3 days. My hope is to bring energy and humor and get us up and moving through this training. I don't want to be a talking head for the next 29 hours. So I want to make this interesting, and part of this 6-hour video will contain some videos of other training topics so that you're not just listening to me as a talking head for 6 hours. The objectives that we're going to be covering is an introduction into peer support. And prior to the remaining 24 hours of the course, you're going to have further experiential training sessions through those 3 days. We're going to be exploring the necessity, the why behind why peer support is so necessary, and how each culture among first responders has its own unique needs and subcultures. We're going to be defining the 8 dimensions of wellness and really taking a deep dive into each of those areas of wellness and understanding and defining where peer support falls into those different kinds of dimensions of wellness, and how peer support can be an intricate role in all of those dimensions in one way or another. We're going to go over the kind of the introductions of the fundamentals behind emergency first aid in terms of psychological first aid, and then just kind of end with the core principles in which are not negotiable to have an effective peer support team. And then I want to just be able to kind of set the stage for the next 3 days at the end of this class, so that we can have the most beneficial time together in those 3 days. Again, not to bore you, but just kind of in terms of setting the stage for what is going to be occurring over the next 3.5 days. These are the topics that are required by the Department of Public Safety under the state statute, which is 181.9731, which is the statute that covers us under confidentiality, being a peer support counselor. And I will be going into these intricacies much deeper when we go into ethics, laws, and boundaries, and the laws around peer support and confidentiality. But the topics that we are going to be hitting on, and these are just a few, we will expand on several as we go along, but obviously identifying and promoting wellness and self-care. One of the most important things we're going to need to do as peer support members is we have to be able to take care of ourselves. Right? Many of us are all overprotective, we're caretakers, we're fixers. And so sometimes the type of people that we are when we become helpers is we sometimes lose sight of when we're not okay, because we would much rather be focusing on others. So in terms of going over the statutory requirements for peer support training under the Public Safety Peer Support Counseling approved deliverables, we're going to be covering the topics of identifying and promoting wellness and self-care. One of the things that many of us are great at and also struggle at is we all want to help. We all want to be there. And many of us were wounded, and we are also wanting to care for others who are wounded, and likes attract likes. And so sometimes when we are constantly helping others, we may not always have the insight into ourselves in terms of, am I taking care of myself right now? What's that person working on? Did I get enough sleep? Am I working out? Am I eating right? Have I seen my own family enough? And so these are things that we're going to be exploring over the next 30 hours. Following by effective coping, resilience, and recovery strategies. This is going to be key, again, not only for you as team members, but also of how to bring those strategies and coping skills to those who come to us looking for tools in our toolbox to be able to help them in their situation or traumatic event, or simply just their overwhelming amount of stress. And so being able to get those tools and share it with others. We're going to be covering the cumulative stress and how that shows up among ourselves and our peers in terms of the effects of stress, and then also how we can manage the stress that we're dealing with and carrying with on a day-to-day basis, especially in 2024, and all of the specialties of first responders. We are all understaffed and being pushed on overtime and working with less and working with less safety of having enough people. And the next thing we're going to be covering is that cumulative of stress and recognition of how that stress impacts yourself, your body, your sleep, how you're eating, how you're taking care of yourself. And so learning more about that for yourselves, in addition to having that insight into yourselves and then noticing it in others, and how we can best help individuals who are carrying that extra cumulative stress on a day-to-day basis, endorsing burnout. Which goes into the next topic, is understanding burnout in terms of what leads to that and what's the difference between burnout and secondary trauma. It's not one and the same. We'll be covering in depthly peer support and best practices and policy. I would never want to discredit anyone else's training, but not all trainings are alike. And so really understanding the rules and laws around best practices in terms of peer support and what we can do and what we cannot do under the statute of 181.9731. And so just being able to just stay in your scope and not overcomplicating things, and realizing that as a peer, you are a volunteer and you're going to have hopefully amazing training, but remembering that you are a volunteer and that you're there to be an extra ear to help and to support someone in need, and potentially be able to refer them to someone else if it's just a handoff. So really understanding in terms of best practices and policies around that, and really understanding the ethics and laws behind peer support, and then also having an understanding of mental health professionals' duties and actions as well. Which goes into the next topic, having effective interface with a licensed mental health professional. That's really important to have someone that can be a clinical advisor of a peer support team, because that mental health professional will carry the liability and the insurance and the license to be able to cover making really tough decisions that perhaps a peer may be presented with that might be completely overwhelming for them, such as someone who may be showing signs of suicidal ideation, where that might get really scary really fast for that person. And so really having that understanding of working with another mental health professional is going to be really key to having that relationship. And then obviously this goes without saying, understanding department policy. Each department who has peer support may have a different policy for their particular agency. And so those are things that you have to understand for your agency, and then you can take away best practices that we suggest as a training. However, every department has different things and guidelines that they have to follow. We're going to be going over basic crisis communication techniques, which I have no doubt everyone in this class, taking this class, is probably exceptionally skilled in this area. But it might be a different situation dealing with someone you know versus someone you're helping in crisis and you may not ever see them again. It's a little more in depth, and it can impact that person in a different way. Reviewing and having knowledge further about alcohol and substance abuse. We are facing different challenges right now with the marijuana being passed as legal in the state of Minnesota, which makes things even more difficult for potential first responders, what the people they're dealing with are taking, in addition to other chemicals, but also chemicals they may be taking as well. So really getting more in touch in terms of what signs and symptoms for alcohol and substance abuse. And then 2024 has not been very giving to first responders, with the significant losses that we have taken in 2024 of the loss of fallen officers and firefighters and deputies, and the loss of life we lost in 2024 due to suicides among first responders. And so this is an area that we're going to be spending quite a bit of time on. Going over cross-cultural issues and peer support. Obviously, not everyone might be a best fit to aid and assist a peer in need. And so really having an understanding of different cultural backgrounds that each peer member may be having in terms of what would be a best fit for helping another peer in a struggle. Really focusing a lot on listening skills, including verbal and nonverbal communication. Going over mental health crisis and crisis intervention skills in terms of how we're going to best ground people in the eyes of crisis who may be in front of us during a work day or potentially outside of work hours. We're going to be learning about critical incident stress management, aka CISM, which I find is one of the most important things that we can do for our first responders, because it's the first point of contact in which we begin taking care of our employee. and our first responder is to get around them, make sure they have all the information, give them the time to process that before they can go home, and be able to have that experience shared and divided with the people involved. And unfortunately, because of staffing and many other reasons, a lot of departments don't have the resources at that time, and they may or may not have a local volunteer CISM team to provide that. But it's one of the most important things we do. And it's also something that as a trainer, I'm trying to break the stigma, and that we can do debriefings for many different things. It doesn't have to be a fatal of a 2-year-old or a officer involved shooting or a murder. It can be for anything that group of people deemed a traumatic event in the course of their situation. And so I think opening that and taking care of what we have a very young population of first responders and veterans and firefighters. The age groups are getting younger and younger. And this calls for further action of helping, supporting people that are starting in careers much, much younger. And then we'll obviously spend a lot of time on suicide risk recognition and intervention models that we can use to try to be a catalyst to change, or getting someone to the right person in that moment and to be part of a solution for that person. So lots of different things we're going to be covering in this 30-hour training. Continuing on, going over that social, relational, organizational, and substance abuse stressors in terms of how work and substance use can often go hand in hand. You're going to learn further through when we talk about chemicals, that 30 to 35% of most first responders are either chemically dependent or chemically addictive. And so this is just something that is becoming more and more. And since the pandemic is something that is hurting so many more first responders than we've seen before. We're going to be looking at strategies to identify and mitigate negative coping mechanisms, depending on what your area is in terms of which first responder you are. We may have different ways of going out after work. Sometimes we can't leave where work is. We may not necessarily be in the same geographic location due to where we are working or where our office is, et cetera. And so just really understanding how the organizational structure can have so much of an impact on how someone is coping with their social, relational situations at the workplace. And then really diving into those negative coping. People, often it's really hard to put the mirror in front of us and look at those negative coping strategies. But if we ask people prior to the start of their career where they are now, if they would want to change things, you may get a lot of hands raised. We're going to spend a lot of time on statutory limits to privacy, confidentiality, and privilege, because that is the law, and not to scare people. But again, it's just remembering that while you're going to be given a lot of information in this 30-hour class, keep in mind that it's the golden rule of we do the best we can with what we know. And the hope is we get you as much information as you can, and you continue on in your learning of keeping up to date on best practices for peer support moving forward. Spending time on boundaries of peer support. Sometimes people are going to wear several different hats. For example, a sergeant may be extremely passionate about peer support, but he may be supervising someone he may have to discipline. And so there's some boundaries that can struggle if that particular sergeant has to wear 2 different hats of peer support and sergeant. And so just really understanding the boundaries around peer support and recognizing that these boundaries are important. But there are times they may have to be broken due to mandated reporting or other things that even a therapist would be subject to reporting. So again, that's when we want to get somebody involved in the referral process, and to always have a mental health professional guiding the person throughout their journey if it's outside their scope. We're going to go over common mental health and behavioral reactions, understanding depression, post-traumatic impact, understand the impact of simple and complex trauma. This will be an area we'll spend a lot of time on, and it's kind of one of my areas of expertise. And we're going to talk about solutions around those topics, because while we are seeing an increase in PTSD retirements and disabilities, and an increase in depression and other mental health situations. So as we move through the topics, common mental health and behavioral reactions, such as understanding depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, understanding the impact of both simple and complex trauma and how they're different and similar. And then understanding kind of basic concepts around anxiety and depression, suicidality, but also learning how to cope with these particular situations. This happens to be kind of my area of expertise, and we'll spend a lot of time in terms of, while these things seem really bad and they're topics that are of concern and heightened in terms of the first responder field, the increase in depression, PTSD, disabilities, and medical disabilities, complex trauma arising at record highs, and just the overwhelming amount of individuals since 2020 who are struggling with anxiety, depression, and sleep problems has increased at very difficult rates. So why peer support? This is where I would love to have an engagement of why you're here, why you think you're here, and we will have further discussion later on as we move through this. But why peer support? Well, have you had a time in your life when you shared an experience with someone? How did you leave that shared experience? Did you feel like you felt closer to them? Did you feel like you felt heard? But oftentimes, when we feel heard, we feel lighter. So sharing an experience with someone that can understand that experience gives us a sense of connection. And that sense of connection gives us a sense of safety, that I can share this with this person and they will not judge me. They will be able to understand, hopefully, my situation. I have a mantra: pain shared is pain divided. You've heard me say it already. The flip side to that is joy shared is joy multiplied. I would love to jump through the rooftops of how much joy is going on in the outside world right now. But I'm trying. Every single day we get to look for things that make us grateful and have gratitude. And part of my own recovery process is to do that every single day with my spouse and look at what I have to be grateful for today. It seems cheesy, but it's a very intentional thing that I do every single day. And we're going to talk about mindset and how we can change our mindset despite how challenging all of the things that are going to be brought at you in this role and what they're being brought at you currently. I want us to still find a way to have that gratitude, because at the end of the day, if you'll hear this often as well, when we're restless, irritable, and discontent, we're not showing up the way we would want to show up. We're not showing up very grateful. And my hope is that you will gain as many tools and connections in this class that will only just spread to further individuals to kind of share a new movement of how we can better take care of each other in this very challenging world that we face being a first responder in 2024 and beyond. So my goal of this is to have peer support be an extension of your current support network. Some of you may have EAPs. There are good ones, there are not so good ones, but again, you are not replacing any type of support network that is currently being in place at your location or your agency. However, you can be an extension of that, and you can also be a referral service potentially to the right EAP resource or to the right mental health professional because of connections that you're going to learn in this class and in your community. You're going to be having a skilled ear. You're going to be a trained crisis responder, but also have the knowledge to know when to refer to a peer or someone of a higher level of service or greater scope of service, such as a mental health therapist, marriage and family therapist, a licensed social worker. We have to make sure that our ego is never getting in the way of us as peer support members asking for help as well. And so I know for me, that was one of the biggest struggles that I had, is asking for help. I was a strong female SWAT woman in law enforcement and had a position of authority, and I was not very good at asking for help. And I was often the one that had to prove everyone wrong. So when we got taser trained and I had the option of a 3-minute dry stun or the full 5, I took the full 5. And that will play into some of our other stories as we go, as we kind of dive into the different cultures within the different first responders of what it's like to be a female in some of these specialties. Again, but why peer support, why we need this, why it's important, is to crush the macho image that I just described in myself as trying to be superwoman and having the mentality that nothing can break me. I will be fine. My worst word I ever hate today is fine. But just crushing this macho image in terms of why peer support can work. a lot of people, police, fire, veterans, corrections officers, EMS, doctors, they don't trust people. They don't trust mental health professionals. There's a lot of stigma that goes with mental health. And while I feel like we are crushing the stigma daily, monthly, annually, I don't feel it's the huge stigma it once was. However, there are continuing to be the barriers that we are losing more of you to suicide in the line of duty, regardless of your profession in first responder land. And so we cannot fight this. And so the distrust, again, part of my role is to try to build those relationships. And one of the roles I serve is teaching for Adler Graduate School, who has a specific training that they're training over almost 40 hours of CEUs to therapists to become more competent in understanding your job a little better. Because as you know, I know when I did my own work, the person did not know anything about law enforcement and we just didn't click. And what I valued in that person is that therapist referred me to someone else and didn't want to try to figure me out. And I really appreciated that that person didn't let their ego get in the way and refer me to the right trauma therapist. And again, trust is at the absolute of why we need peer support. Discussion with fellow employees and an acceptable alternative, right? Talking to each other sometimes is just easier than talking to your spouse or your supervisor. It's just an easier way to communicate what's going on. The emotional toll of law enforcement and public service in general can be devastating. And we have seen that in 2024, whether it be Burnsville, up north, Minneapolis, the losses that we have seen in our fallen officers and firefighters. And it is just overwhelming, the emotional toll that is taken on our profession and those that love us. I know many of my clients often enter couples work with me because their spouse wants he or she to get out of the profession of law enforcement or being a paramedic or being in corrections or a veteran. And so often I get to be the mediator of a spouse wanting their loved one to not do what they were meant to do. And so it's challenging, but so much more important. Fear of past administrative tactics we talk about in terms of why peer support. There may not be trust or they may be great trust. Some agencies I work with, there are, and some agencies it's quite a struggle. And then fear of being honest with your supervisors. If you're struggling with depression or anxiety, often that's going to be the last person we're going to want to tell is our supervisor that we're struggling with anxiety or butterflies in our stomach. And so having a peer to be able to share that with is so critical to having another person meet us, share and divide the struggle of that, because I can guarantee many of us are struggling with anxiety at some level and we can relate to that. And the rest of these we will discuss in person further. I'm going to show just kind of a short video here, again, just adding to why you're here and why peer support is so necessary.
My name is Chris Malin. I'm a detective sergeant with the Brookline Police Department. I've been a Brookline police officer for 27 years.
My name is Derek Harrington. I'm a police sergeant in the patrol division at Medway Police Department.
Police officers regularly respond to calls involving a wide span of violent incidents of people with serious injuries, incidents of abuse, domestic violence. Unfortunately, they respond to calls of suicide, drug overdoses, and any number of traumatic incidents that are probably the worst day of other people's lives.
First responders see a multitude of incidents, and when they see something tragic, especially for the first time, it can be hard for them.
Being routinely exposed to traumatic events can have an effect on somebody's personal life, their professional life, their demeanor, and it can make it difficult for them to live their lives fully, whether that's as a productive police officer or a good parent, a good spouse. That necessitates the need to have some peer-based resources available.
We need to make sure that our people are taken care of and their concerns and their feelings and emotions and all the things are validated and dealt with. And that's where peer support team comes in.
So when we provide support to officers that we work with, it can happen in different ways. Sometimes a person will approach you. Oftentimes it's something that myself or another team member might recognize, or it could be something that one of these people's coworkers bring to our attention and they're not comfortable approaching them.
A situation where I received peer support was I was notified while on vacation that my brother had taken his own life. I just felt a sense of emptiness, and I had trouble focusing, eating, sleeping. I just was distracted. Finally, it hit me that I was not in a good place, and not only was I not safe for myself on this job, I was not safe for my fellow officers. And I reached out to my lieutenant to get some help, and he put me in touch with an officer out of a peer support unit. And this officer was very supportive, was able to listen to me, validate my feelings, my emotions, and what I was going through. And he was able to get me back on a path where I could be a productive and successful officer.
Peer support programs make that awkward step of reaching out to someone for help a little less awkward because they're speaking to a peer. Having a peer that they know they can turn to makes it more likely that they will seek out the help.
I believe in peer support because peer support is an extension of what we do as first responders. We're supporting our peers in the community. And if we can't do it within our four walls and be able to support our brother and sister, how are we going to effectively support them out on the street?
I think on a big picture, it recognizes that culturally, as a profession, we're changing. We're recognizing things that we should have recognized decades ago. And I think that's a good thing. And I think peer support plays a big role in that, because it makes it more accessible for officers to get the assistance they may need, and peer support can be sort of the gateway and the conduit to that help.
These programs can help prevent a potential suicide of an officer. If an officer is struggling and just feels like that he or she has no other option, these programs are 24/7. Officers are willing to come out at any time because they have a duty to the profession and to help their brother and sister get to a better place.
When we check in with somebody, there's no stigma attached to it. I had an officer last week actually mention when a number of people checked in with them after a suicide, that they said they appreciated the fact that so many people checked in, and they also appreciated the fact that now it was accepted that they did that, and that was common. And I think that's a good sign that we're changing the way we look at a lot of these situations with our officers and addressing it in a more healthy way.
Ultimately, you know, what these programs are for. They're there for the officer and their families, because this is a hard career. This is a hard job to do, and we need as much support as we can get.
You owe it to yourself and your family to live the best possible life that you can. And if being a police officer is making it difficult to accomplish that goal, peer support programs are there to make that accomplishment a little bit easier.
Curious what you guys thought of that. I really appreciated the vulnerability of the officer that shared. I mean, he went to his lieutenant, which was the very opposite of what I shared in the slide before, in that he actually trusted his supervisor enough to go to them, and that supervisor kind of chose his boundary that I'm going to be a supervisor. I'm going to give you to one of these trained peer support people. And it worked for him. And that's how it works, is that most courageous, difficult thing to do, which is to pick up a phone or a text or to car with someone to let them know that you're not okay, is sometimes the most courageous thing that we can ever do when we're struggling with whatever it is we have going on in our lives. And so I really liked that video, and it just again goes to say that peer support works when it's done appropriately and effectively and in the right way. And I just love hearing stories like that. So again, why am I here teaching this class? Too many of you are under attack, literally. Obviously, I don't want everyone to be biased to law enforcement. It's been a hell of a year, losing I believe now 4 officers killed. We've lost a firefighter. We've lost another firefighter not in the line of duty. We've lost at least 3 suicides of police officers that I'm aware of so far this year, and that is just devastating to have that happen right close to home in our state. It's just not normal, and it just kind of carried this heavy weight, at least on me, in terms of what we can do more. And again, the more is adding all of you to this cadre of championing, being a champion for your agency in terms of doing things to help and support one another can often be the most gratifying and most impactful thing and any person that you will ever know. So I always encourage people to spread the among peers, your leadership and subordinates. Again, just sharing the message, normalizing this in terms of we are all struggling out here. And just sharing that message that pain shared is pain divided. When someone says I'm fine or I don't want to talk about it, sometimes it's having the courage to say, hey, you know what? I am not okay either. And one of my most pushy things that I try to share with organizations is it's okay to not be okay. And we have been so ingrained in our professions to always be just fine and go to the next call, event, situation, call out, etc., that it's difficult. And I don't want anyone to feel that they're alone. It is very clear that the things we see and do are not normal. Doesn't matter which of the thin lines you are in the flag. My corrections officers, who are the first line of defense to try to help and aid someone who has attempted to end their own life and have to deal with some of the most disgusting conditions that we can ever imagine, and to be stuck in those conditions and to have to show up every single day and do it well and be polite and do it professionally every single day. And our police officers and our firefighters and our paramedics that are dealing with people who may just see a uniform and not care which part of it you are from. They simply see the uniform and they today have a different disdain for it than they did 4 or 5 years ago. And that is really unfortunate and blows my mind. But we have gone through a very significant chain of events in May of 2020 that have changed the course of history in terms of what being a first responder is really like today. It's very different. Going through a pandemic and trying to help and support others when you can't see them, you can't touch them, you can't heal with them. And the one thing that we learned from the pandemic, which was so apparent, is we heal in community. We don't heal in isolation. And when we're all isolated, we turn to things that were more maladaptive. We're drinking more, we're bored, we can't go out, we can't do the social things that we like to do. And so we often turned to things that were not very helpful and healthy for us. And now, since the pandemic in my practice, I'm seeing more and more and more addiction than I've ever seen in my practice, due to it just starting there. And then also adding the stressors and the trauma and the complex trauma and the repeated exposure to things, and then not feeling like you have a say. And so as peers, we always want people to know that they're not alone and the things that they're seeing are not normal and the reactions they're having are normal to a very abnormal situation. And the reality is that we're fighting as we're losing more to suicide, cancer, heart disease, and the general public. Pick your specialty. And we're under attack, and we have to prepare psychologically, socially, emotionally, and behaviorally in terms of how do we take care of ourselves, how to remain resilient in our professions, and how do we take care of ourselves and feel safe in what we do and how we show up. And so, again, back to the absolute honor of sharing this space with all of you, and that we share these feelings that we want to be there for the people that are showing up, doing the work. So in terms of defining peer support is simply defined as offering, receiving help based on shared understanding, respect, and mutual empowerment between people in similar situations. Just kind of like what we've been talking about. If I share an experience with you and you have a similar one, and we just now made a connection based on a similar experience, based on potentially similar cultural backgrounds, we just made a connection. And the next time we meet, that connection will be easier and safer, and we may share more. And our load might get lighter because we simply made that connection and we shared, divided, and conquered and felt lighter when we left that situation. Sadly, I don't want to disprove my credit of my license and what I do. I hope I do well, but the statistics are still against me that first responders, corrections officers, firefighters, dispatchers, military, they often seek peer support rather than their superiors or even in lieu of mental health professionals, because we want to be with someone who understands what it's like to be me or my field or my area of expertise, right? It goes to the question, why do we think that is? We go to people that we feel safe. And something that you will hear throughout the training again and again is the absolute critical nature of confidentiality. And that if we do not understand that, and we'll again go into the legal ethics and the understanding of these types of situations, but hopefully we have a working knowledge of confidentiality. And if we don't have that, that's what can destroy a peer support team. And now we've just done damage to an agency, not help them. And so I look forward to just seeing everybody and meeting you guys in terms of your thoughts and being part of this process. So Dr. Black, he is actually the founder of Lexapol, and I'm just going to share a quote from him about the case for peer support and public safety and beyond. He says, entering the profession, first responders are specimens of physical and mental health, explains Dr. Black. These are tough, resilient, strong people when they enter the profession. What we need to understand then is how the profession chips away over time. We know from research that the impact of repeated exposure to critical incidents, coupled with organizational and additional stressors that come with a career in public safety, makes first responders at increased risk for depression, PTSD, and suicidal ideation. The question becomes, what are we going to do about it? And this is, again, why I'm here, why you're here, is that the option is us. The option is we can be an extension of care for those that walk alongside us and around us and can be there for them. I would also argue in Dr. Black's quote, the absolute increase among all public safety in anxiety and depression and sleep struggles, as well as addiction. And so we're fighting a fight that no one else often knows anything about. And so it's very, very critical that we work on this together. So again, why does peer support work? I mean, you guys are in this class. Why does this work, right? Well, we get to meet with people who speak our language, right? Obviously, I can talk to cops, firefighters, dispatchers, veterans, corrections folks. I've worked with every single form of public safety in the planet. Security, we all understand language through radio communication. We understand certain things. But even though we have unique acronyms that none of us may be able to memorize for the other specialty, we all have acronyms and we speak the same language and we get each other. We learn from people who have been there. That's why it works. It's available to us 24/7. Depending on how your team operates, the hope is you have a peer support person on every shift, every day, covering 24/7, where there's at least a peer that if someone's in crisis, that's working alongside you, that we can expand this cadre of people to be an extended ear and listener and helper in terms of that 24/7 support. We can assist in communication. We can learn how to discuss what they've experienced. Sometimes people have a really hard time explaining or putting into words what they just went through. I have that happen all the time. I have not talked about this particular death for a year and a half. I just had a session with a firefighter who had a horrific call, I think 3-4 years ago, and a child was killed, a father was killed, his best friend was killed, who was also a firefighter. And it was a horrific call, and he had not talked about it in 4 or 5, however many years it had been, until we met virtually 2 days ago. And he just sobbed and sobbed. And he says to me, if I don't think about it, I'm fine. And we talked about, stuffing and stuffing and stuffing, and how eventually our cup gets full, and you're going to hear all about the cup getting full. as we go on in class. But it was just heart-wrenching. And so just aiding and helping people identify why their behaviors are not matching who they think they are at the moment. And for this person, he was short with his wife, pissed off, goes to anger, yells at the kids, and that was not his normal. And again, men, women, sometimes we lack that insight of like, what's going on? Is it normal? And often the last thing we're going to find is the connection of it could be mental health related, of why I'm not showing up and I'm having a response that's not appropriate to the level that it was pushed. And so why again does it work? Increase family support. There's no judgment. It's an opportunity for us to give back, right? I would be lying if I said my profession does not give back to me. I learn from my clients every single day. My clients, I encourage to hold me accountable as much as I hold them accountable. And so it's most of what I do is not work other than invoicing. So it's a good fit for me. And again, you're going to hear it again and again, pain shared, pain divided. I'm going to have you all saying it. And then what else? Why does it work? This is for you guys to bring for further discussion in terms of why you're here and why you've seen this work, among others. And I can't wait to meet you. The other benefits of peer support, there are a myriad of benefits of peer support for first responders, which is completely backed by the research, which includes having an increased sense of self-esteem and confidence, increased sense of control and ability to bring out changes in your lives, an increased sense of hope and inspiration. My hope is someone always walks through my door, and through years of experience, I can without a doubt tell you that most people think what they're coming into my office for is by far worse than it actually is, or they think they themselves are by far worse than they really are. And my hope is to reflect what they're saying, give them hope, and then give them a reality of what's really going on. And so if we have an increased sense of control, knowledge is power, we can aid and be at the change we want to be in our own lives. Increased sense of hope and inspiration, like I said, increased empathy and acceptance, increased engagement in our own self-care and wellness. One thing, if I was the one who's selecting everybody, is I would ask you, how are you role modeling wellness? You know, these will be some challenges we'll talk about in class, but obviously I wouldn't want to ask somebody to do something I've never done. And so sometimes being in this peer support cadre increases our need to be a little bit more vulnerable. And sometimes that's not comfortable, and we can protect that and hold it sacred. But this is vulnerable work that we do. We are dividing and sharing pain of situations that the rest of the world does not have access to, does not have to see. And so engaging in that self-care and wellness, social functioning, being a peer to another peer, we get to do fun things and help other people. And sometimes we may have several people that may have to assist one person all at the same time, depending on what their skill set and what the knowledge is of the person in struggling. We see that there's a decreased use in substances, that relapse rates and depression keep going down when peer support is involved. I am a living proof of 13 years sobriety that being with peers and of individuals that understand what I can't control and how that's impacted me and my own shame spiral around it is powerful. And I wouldn't be here to share any of this with you if I hadn't have had that. So it's pretty important to who I am and how I show up. Hopefully, another benefit that's been shown through the research is reduced hospitalization admits of inpatient services, right? Having an intervention that happens maybe with a therapist who's either through the agency or not, or outside the agency, who is connected with a known peer. If we can get that interaction going, we can avoid those worst types of calls where someone has to get put, say, on a 72-hour hold. Worst position I ever want to be in. Worst position any peer or friend would want to be in as a mandated reporter, but it might be something that we are in and we don't have a choice around it. And so the power that we have of doing peer support is amazing. And because we have put ourselves in this situation of being more vulnerable, putting ourselves out there, getting understanding, getting education, getting language to help others understand some of their own emotions, feelings, behaviors, is decreasing stigma. around mental health and the struggles around it. And so lots of benefits to what we're about to do. So my ultimate goal is to try to keep it simple, right? You're going to get a lot of training, and I love to get paid for 30 hours of training, but this is a lot of stuff. And other trainings I've had have said this is a lot of stuff. And so I really try to break it down in the next 3 days with a lot of scenarios, lots of time for us to connect and have discussions around what if and how to's, so that you leave this training trying to think of every possible situation and that we can discuss as a group of how best to handle some of those unknowns, the what if and how to's. And so ultimately we want to provide a trusted peer that will give non-judgmental support, to be an empathic ear, and to be a confidential opportunity to be able to have someone talk to you. And the duration of this class is going to take a deep dive into every single one of those, into how you can best show up. I'm going to show this quick video of just kind of an example of how peer support can work and the power of peer support.
How does it feel when you have a conversation with someone who's had a similar experience as you? It could be something as simple as sharing thoughts on a book you both read, or maybe something more heavy like sharing the experience of grieving a loved one. Some words we might be able to use to describe it could be empathetic, relatable, sensing that a fear of judgment has gone away because there's a commonality of understanding. The specific events and experiences might look completely different, but the feelings and the knowledge that you gained are the common ground of that connection. And how could we define connection? So I Googled the word to see what results I might find. And to my surprise, among the top results was the name of a technology company and a song by OneRepublic called Connection. Not really sure what results I was expecting to find, but it definitely wasn't computers and music. But the Google definition of connection is a relationship in which a person, thing, or idea is linked or associated with something else. So from the time that I was in middle school, I very much associated with depression. I had a lot of guilt and shame about how deep my sadness went. And the only way I really knew how to cope with it was through self-harm and tearing myself apart with words, because I was worthless. Or at least that's what I believed. And when I was 15 years old, I attempted to take my life. For what felt like forever. I could not figure out how to get rid of the thoughts of wanting to end my life, and I thought that living on a spectrum of suicidality and depression would define me. But I wanted to get better, so I did things that I thought, okay, maybe this will help me. I went to therapy, I learned coping skills. I developed this routine where I would wake up an hour early to just sit, have a cup of coffee, and reflect. But what really got me through these times was my dream. And my dream was to be a clown for Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. Yes, my dream was to be a circus clown. And it started when I was just 14 years old. But now let's fast forward to 2016. It's 2 weeks before I graduate college. And guess what? I got the call. I got the call I had been waiting for my whole life, and I was going to be a Ringling clown. I was ecstatic. About a month later, a few days after I arrived though, Ringling made the announcement that they would be closing for good, and my 18-month contract was cut short to just 5 months. I was devastated. On the days that I didn't want to be alive, I would just think about and focus on the circus, and this would get me through. It was my passion, and I didn't think I would be able to feel passion for anything ever again. But that was until 2020. And I see a job posting that read, "Lived experience with suicide preferred." Now that's something you don't see on LinkedIn every day. But I remember reading that and thinking to myself, trying to end my life could get me a job? And that's how I learned about peer support, and I'm now the supervisor of a peer support program at a nonprofit behavioral health organization. But since becoming a certified recovery peer specialist, I realized it wasn't trying to end my life that got me a job. It was making the choice to continue it. I listened to that song by OneRepublic, and the lyrics that really stood out to me say, I'd be ready and willing and able to edit the story because there's so many people here to be so damn lonely. Choosing to be ready and willing and able to edit our stories is at the core of peer support. We can't change what's happened to us, but we do get to say if we're going to let it define us. So a peer support specialist is someone who identifies as a person in recovery from a mental health and/or substance use challenge and uses that lived experience combined with education and training to provide support to others. A peer has a real power to access connection because although we all have our own stories and experiences, we relate to a time when our lives were unmanageable. Some of us may or may not have college degrees, but we are experientially credentialed, having knowledge of hardship and perseverance that simply cannot be learned through a textbook. Although I am standing here today as a certified recovery peer specialist, and peers in the workforce do have a credentialing process in order to gain certification. And through that process, we're learning about how to support others, but we're also really taking a look at our own wellness journey in the process. So according to SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, one of the foundations of peer support is that the relationship between the peer and the other person is mutual. So meaning that there's a shared responsibility between both persons. And because of this mutuality, peers have a really unique dynamic ability to provide an array of different types of recovery supports. So that first program that I was with a suicide prevention program. And I started meeting with someone who we will call M. So M had struggled with multiple mental health diagnoses and suicidal ideation, as I had myself. And each week I would go to M's house for weekly recovery meetings to just listen and provide support. M didn't have easily accessible access to transportation, so there were some weeks where I would go to the local Riverwalk with them so they could feel more connected to the community. There were also times when they needed assistance with picking up their psychiatric medication, which they found was a vital piece to managing their mental health, and I was able to help them with that. So M was also in the process of applying for SSI, SSDI, and when it came time for their medical appointment, they asked me if I could go with them for support and help with advocacy to the doctor if they should need, and I was able to take them to that appointment. So after about a year of meeting, M had really grown more confident in their recovery, and when it did come time for our meetings to end, M had said to me that over the last year, it felt like they had the support of a friend. Peers can really help to bridge that gap to access in our community. So in my program now, myself and my program participants are able to do things like, myself and my staff are able to do things with program participants like attend NA or AA or Smart Recovery meetings. We go into the local jail to meet with incarcerated individuals to have recovery meetings. We can meet with people over Zoom, in their home, in our office. We can literally meet them where they're at in their journey to provide them with support. Let's think about it like this. Let's say you've been a victim of identity theft, and you have to make dozens and dozens of phone calls to resolve this. So you make a phone call to your bank, and what do we get on the other line? Everyone's favorite thing to hear when we need help, the robot, the automated robot. So you're listening to the robot go through the prompts, and then maybe the phone call starts to look a little something like this. At any time you'd like to speak to one of our customer service representatives, just say representative. Representative? I'm sorry, your request could not be complete. Press 1 for banking, 2, credit cards, 3, representative. We want to talk to a representative because it's a real human who we can have a connection with and providing us with more insight and assistance in navigating our issues. Peers are like those navigating representatives, except we're in the passenger seat with the person we're meeting with in the driver's seat of their own recovery. So what's recovery? SAMHSA's working definition of recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. I interpret this as a process of healing and moving beyond the limitations of what our conditions might have once told us we have. As Florida and states across the US transition to a recovery-oriented system of care, for recovery to be sustainable and possible, we need access to the 4 domains of recovery, which are home, health, community, and purpose. Home, a basic need, a stable and safe place to live. Health, being able to manage and overcome symptoms that provide support to our overall physical and emotional well-being. Community, relationships, social networks, and resources that provide support and inclusion. And 4, purpose, creating and finding meaningful engagements in our life. I have definitely found purpose in my recovery. But I turned to Google again to see what results I might find when searching a word like recovery. And again, to my surprise, among the top results was music, a song by James Arthur called Recovery. So of course I listened to it. And in the song he says, "In the sound of the sea, in the oceans of me, I designed my recovery." I designed my recovery. There are so many different ways that someone can design their recovery. There is no one-size-fits-all answer, but there is personal responsibility in finding it. No one could make me wake up at 6 a.m. to have a cup of coffee and reflect. And the only person who can find what works best for you is you. I did find it ironic, though, after searching meaningful words like recovery and connection on the world's largest search engine, that among the top results was music. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense, because humans deeply feel and resonate and connect with music. And I figured out why both clowning and peer support became my passion. It's because they're both rooted in connection. Clowning is more than just juggling and unicycling. It's about embracing vulnerability to connect with someone and saying, "I see you." And being able to connect with others through my lived experience of mental health challenges has brought new meaning to my life. And there's science behind why connection is so powerful. According to research by Dr. Emma Sapala, the science director at Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research, some benefits of connection show 50% chance of increased longevity, lower levels of anxiety and depression, and better ability to have emotional regulation skills. When we are engaging in creating recovery supports that are based off of shared lived experience, we are creating connection. What if peers continue to grow to be both within and beyond the traditional setting of behavioral health? What if they were in our school systems, our community centers? I wish that when I was a teenager in treatment that I had the ability to talk to a peer specialist, but I didn't, because I didn't know they existed. And the first step to having access to anything is having the awareness it exists. I challenge you to have a conversation with someone in your own life who might be exploring their own wellness journey. Are there peer support resources in your community that you could access? NAMI, for example, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, has dozens and dozens of community chapters all throughout the US and offers a variety of peer-based services. And data compiled by NAMI, found through their national website, reported that in 2020, over 12 million Americans had serious thoughts of suicide. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among individuals aged 10 to 14, 25 to 34, and the third leading cause of death among individuals aged 15 to 24. Now, I know that sometimes numbers and statistics can feel dry and impersonal, but what if one of those numbers is someone you can think of right now? A family member? A friend? Do you self-identify with it? Because I know I do. And I could have been one of those numbers. But thankfully I'm not. I'm standing here today, and I choose recovery. And I don't think I would have found recovery without clowning. From studying physical comedy over the years, one of my all-time favorites is, of course, the infamous Robin Williams. I watched all of his movies growing up, and there's always been certain scenes from certain films that have stood out to me. In the film Dead Poets Society, Robin Williams tells his students, no matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. Peers are out there right now changing the world, sharing their words and ideas on resiliency and recovery, connecting with others in their journey to create a life that's worth living. And in the climate of the world we have today, we need that more than ever, to find our path, to create a life that is worth living. Thank you.
All right, gang. Powerful, powerful TED Talk. I really like TED Talks. I don't want to bore you with every single one on the planet, but they really are powerful. And when I hear someone that shares a vulnerable story like that, it just kind of touches my heart, because there's parts of her story that I very much connect with. And so that's why I chose to show this particular video. But what I love is the success stories, and just like her, I would love to say I'm one of those success stories. And when I met my spouse 13 and a half years ago, you know, I was on year 1 of sobriety and was at ground zero. And whenever I take myself back to kind of ground zero again, of feeling like I should be here or there or whatever, the only place I need to be is right here, right in front of my face, in the here and now, because all I got is this moment. And they call it a present because it's the present. And yeah, her story was very powerful, and I'm glad I could share with you. So in terms of, obviously, we think of peer support, it's not new. It's been around for years and years and years. Obviously, there's the 12-step programs, there's AA, NA, there's Sex Addicts Anonymous, there's gambling, there's narcotics, you name it, there is a group for it. And you know, all of the things that they have in common is they have a shared understanding of why they're there, and the struggle is real for them, and they understand one another. And so it's extremely powerful. And you know, we are stronger together than we are alone. And that was a very hard concept for me to get, because I was one of those people that if I set my mind to something, I was going to do it. Back in 2009, I did a half Ironman, and my doctor said, you know, you have plantar fasciitis so bad, I can't, I don't want you to race. And I said, well, that's not an option. And so he told me I couldn't run until the race, basically. So I had to just bike and swim. And I had like the fastest bike I've ever had for a half Ironman. And then I ran just about all of it, but had to walk just a little bit. And it's, you know, and so having that mindset of I can, and I couldn't have done it without people in my life to help me along the way. So we are very much stronger together than solo. And sometimes when I work with people in recovery who struggle with like the idea of God and God and whatnot, sometimes, you know, if you're agnostic or you don't believe in anything, that's totally fine. But if we can get behind the phrase of we are stronger together than we are as one, then that can be all you need to understand that peer support works. And has impacted and saved so many lives, as she mentioned in her talk.
This concludes the first part of segment 1. And beginning on the next segment, we'll be starting with cultural differences within each type of first responders.